Okay, we're going live. 1, 2, 3.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Game Changers, a global event. We're very excited to have you all here present. The interest in this particular event has been quite extraordinary, as it has been for our actual Game Changers podcast series. We're going to now, before we move to the official welcome, I'm going to have a look at the agenda for this particular event. So if we can move to the next slide there, please. Thank you. As you can see, we are also live on Twitter. So if you'd like to follow the conversation on Twitter, it is, of course, at Game Changers PC, and the hashtag is Game Changers. And for many of you out there, you would have received the link to the YouTube channel for A School for Tomorrow, where you can watch this event live. It's exciting to have you all here. Phil.
Adriano.
So, Phil, once we've the discussion commences, we'll encourage, of course, everyone with their thoughts to add their thoughts and questions to the buttons there on YouTube. We have already curated quite a number of questions that have come directly from the survey that we did point out. But before we commence this live event, we are now going to start with our acknowledgement of country by a proud Binjara and Karakara Indigenous woman, Leanne Wilson.
Leanne, I wonder whether you might be able to read the acknowledgement for us.
You'll have to unmute yourself there, Leanne. There just seems to be an issue with the audio. It's not playing.
Yeah. Can we move through it then to put the visual up?
Yes.
Leanne, that's the image. It's. Do you have the words in front of you?
No, I don't, unfortunately. Yeah. But that's what I was waiting.
I might just read on.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thanks.
I might just read on your behalf, Leanne.
Thank you.
A School for Tomorrow acknowledges the First Nations and custodians of country throughout Australia and internationally, and their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and to stolen generation survivors. We recognise the intergenerational trauma that remains, and our pledge to build a world that can heal through our unwavering commitment to truth-telling through the power of story and education. A School for Tomorrow stands in solidarity with our Indigenous brothers and sisters and works for justice and true reconciliation. Thank you, Leanne, for crafting that acknowledgement of country for us, and we'll return to you later in the program. Welcome to the Game Changers, a global gathering live event. We are your hosts, Associate Professor of Education and Enterprise, Philip Cummins, and
predominant educational thought leader, Adriano de Prato. And joining us today, of course, at the gathering are three dynamic educators that Phil and I have had the privilege of interviewing for the Game Changers podcast series to date.
Henry Masoma, originally from Zambia, now living in Texas, internationally renowned as the Professor of Kindness, was on our first series, and I had the privilege of sharing a special series with him looking at the topic of good men. He's a fine fellow and a wonderful thinker about the world of education and the context in which we place it. We're very glad to have you here with us today, Henry.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Phil.
Leslie Medema, Well, she's a history teacher to start with, which automatically makes her one of the good guys. She's had a wonderful career. She comes originally from the United States. She ended up as the head of the Green School in Bali. She is now the head of learning for Green School International. She's again, an outstanding thinker and a person who has been responsible for supporting the development of a very different type of school. We welcome you today to our Game Changers live gathering, Leslie. And Nathan Chisholm. Nathan is just up the road from us in Prahran in Melbourne. Nathan is the head of Prahran High School. Again, a tremendous contributor and to the world of public education here in Australia, and the leader of a team which is recasting the way in which we do public schooling here in Australia. In pursuit of a school for tomorrow. We welcome you here today, Nathan.
Well, it's really great to be with everyone this morning. And Phil, how is beautiful Fitzroy going this morning?
Oh, look, Fitzroy is beautiful today. It's crisp, it's cool. The locals are taking their tofu out for a walk, and the almond lattes are tasting very good.
Right. Well, I'm really excited about today. This is a first for both you and I, and to our audience, the banter that you might hear between the two of us is something that has become a little synonymous with our actual podcast event. We're really excited about the fact that our audience has really responded exceptionally well to the podcast, and we can report that today we've had over 11,000 listens of all the podcasts across all our streaming services. So there's a real appetite for doing schooling differently. Phil, over to you.
Certainly. Let's go. Let's get into this global online gathering about changing the game for our COVID children and for those who follow. We need a new social contract for education.
It's really clear, Phil, that we've been engaged in many, many rich conversations with our colleagues around the world for about what's been happening in education, and in response particularly, of course, to COVID-19. We are learning so much about the capacity of our profession to respond to a situation of crisis in such a constructive and effective manner. What seemed impossible or undesirable just a few months ago is now considered a bit of the new normal. And we are taking away from this experience new competencies, our knowledge, our skills, our dispositions, and the learning habits are all changing because basically, Phil, we know they have to. Out of a situation of necessity that is arising in response to this kind of undeniable state of disruption and human suffering, we are changing. And transformation for our time to a kind of new normal has brought on by things beyond our control. So the questions that we have posed for our panel today are going to centre around: what will the future student look like? What will the future teacher look like? And what will the future school leader look like?
Thanks, Adriano. We know that some of you out there have a really strong appetite for change, and we know that some of you don't have a strong appetite for change, and we know that there's a group in the middle. So what we're interested in today is exploring all sorts of options that are available for all sorts of schools, based on the premise that we're all going to move forward into a future which builds that new social contract for education. Leslie Medema, I wonder if I might begin with you, please, ma'am. You are an educator. You're a leader at the Green School in Bali, Indonesia. Green School's also opened a campus in Taranaki in New Zealand. Green School is a learning community that's recently been recognised by the World Economic Forum as a school of the future, with a clear focus on sustainability and the importance of playing an active role in the global community. You've been committed to doing schooling differently for some time now. In your encounters with this new learning paradigm, what do you believe the learning for a future student will look like in order to thrive in this new tomorrow?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be in this group, and it's an honor to talk about Green School, as it's been part of my life for the last decade. But really what we think the school of the future is actually the school of now. I think what COVID is teaching us is that complex hybrid skill sets, including resilience, including understanding the systems of the world and how they interact, is really what we're all struggling with right now, and most certainly what we all need to be able to do in the future. And so what Green School has done through the lens of sustainability and nature, because we really feel like it's nature here, then in your community, and then in your world, that is the foundation for health, and health is the foundation for social justice. And that really has become our passion, and the reason we want, how we want to change the world, and how we think the world needs to change. And at the core of that, from an educational perspective, have been skills, complex hybrid skills, because it's really through that versus through subjects or traditional learning areas. Like, you don't walk into math class in life, right? You walk into complex problems. And so it's really by putting that at the core of our learning, thinking skills, like thinking critically and thinking creatively, but even more important, thinking in systems. COVID has taught us that an economic issue with human behavior, with health, are all together and all need solutions, along with skills of action. So these are really 21st century skills we've put at the core, but we've collapsed them and concentrated them, and taking action and then reflecting on that. So failure is good, but we need to then adapt, we need to then activate and reactivate. And so we've put all of that at the core versus history class, which for a history teacher is hard, but hey, you can actually go deeper in learning areas if you have complex 21st century style skills, and students have more fun doing it that way.
So thank you for that, Leslie. Just letting everybody know, Jessamy G is on hand as our resident artist, and she's going to be sketching and drawing for us as we go. So we're going to be moving backwards and forwards between that, and each one of the participants will be getting a copy of the final drawing as it comes about. Leslie, I think the context that you're establishing there for the Green School is really, really important. Tell me what the student looks like. Tell me what an 18-year-old who comes through the process, what do they know? What can they do? What are their dispositions, and how do they learn? Tell me about that.
Well, first and foremost, we hope that they have a really strong sense of personal confidence and well-being, and that confidence isn't like I can do anything. It's a confidence of, you know what, I have special skills, but so do other people, and I need to work with them to make it happen. We hope that their well-being and their mental health is strong, and when it's not, that they are aware of that and then they seek assistance. We hope that their physical well-being and their artistic passions are all strong, and we really believe that when that is there, then they can go out and do the next thing. And the next thing could be creating their own jobs. We have actually had quite a few students who end up in the healthcare field because they're very much into service, and they're very much into being change makers. But we've always been very conscientious of not overwhelming young people with the problems of the world and with the concept of you have to be the leader and the change maker. That can actually shut young people down if they don't have the skills and if they don't have the well-being. So we start there with skills, and we start there with well-being, and then they go out and they can accomplish what they want to do. So what we hope they do, and what many of them are doing, and I get emails all the time from our graduates, something they're really passionate about that makes a positive difference in the world, and they do that thoughtfully and informed. So
it's not a difference or a contrast between academic rigor and contemporary competencies. It's not that they meld in together. Tell me how that works, please.
Well, actually, our students have gone to universities around the world, and they have done brilliantly. And they have done as well or better than we would have ever imagined, because we did worry at one point in the early days about, this integrated learning, and will they be able then to jump back into very concentrated learning area-based biology courses. So we have found, actually, because we integrate it, they actually remember it better. And if you focus on the skill sets versus on a huge amount of knowledge, they actually can apply those skill sets and learn new things, and they learn those new things much more quickly. So we're finding that they're being very successful in that way. And a lot of our students are actually creating their own university by microcrediting themselves, by going to all different kinds of different universities, online and offline, and by getting different sorts of, oh gosh, I can't come up with the word right now, but like becoming wilderness first aid responders, and then becoming paramedics, and then becoming chefs. This is one person. And so these that they can actually do that themselves and they continue that lifelong learning.
So part of what we're looking at here then is about significant social agency and a connectedness to a higher sense of purpose, Leslie. Thank you very much for helping us look at that in terms of the student. Henry Kasonde Masoma, brother, we're talking here about the remarkable skill of teaching towards this, and we've seen a lot of this skill, expertise, resilience, and adaptability from teachers during COVID-19, beginning, adapting to the situation, working towards this picture of students as social agents, as we're possessing the competencies required to thrive in the world with different pathways and so on. Henry, teachers remain our most valuable resource in all of our schools. From our perspective, in order to support the type of desired outcomes that Leslie's just shared with us, what do you believe the future teacher will need to look like?
Well, Phil, again, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Adriano, thank you so much, guys. Welcome to the 21st century teacher, the triple H factor agent of change, this person that embodies humanity, humor, and humility. The person that sees the student as a human being, the person that knows that the student is deeply broken and deeply whole at the same time, the complexities that are in one meshed in an experience that informs a place that you can only understand when you're humble in its face. So the triple H factor is what I'm calling the new teacher, the triple H factor agent of change. It's this individual that acknowledges the humanity in the student. Then this individual that recognizes the humor, because most of us laugh in our spaces of pain. And then the teacher that recognizes the humility that the student walks into the room with. And so this teacher, Phil, has to be a teacher that is ready to learn. I think a lot of teachers cease to learn once they enter the classroom, but this teacher needs to be ready to learn. And in order for me to explain what this teacher will be or should be, I will say what learning is not. Number one, learning is not a thing that happens in a situated locale. We need to resign off of the idea that we have a monopoly on the educational space of our children. That just because I master history does not mean I am the end all be all of history. That history is being taught on the playground by their peers. Number two, learning is not binary. Mathematics is only 1 + 1 in first grade. And if this kid or this teacher is saying to the kids that 1 + 1 is 2, they perhaps did not graduate from first grade. Number three, learning is not organized. Divorce yourself off of the idea that it has to be linear and so organized. It is chaotic. Chaos, 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 chaos. Number three, learning is not neutral. You do not arrive at the teaching space from a neutral position. And today we started off, Leanne, by talking about inclusion and acknowledging, the heritage in Australia. And we have to understand that in order to speak to these things, sometimes we step out of those neutral spaces and actually enter into a space that could appear radical to some. But I believe that it's in those spaces that we actually invoke the spirit of change that is required in this post-COVID world that we'll be living in. Number five, learning is not passive. And then number six, learning is not didactic. And so what I'd say to the teacher of the 21st century, Phil, is that pain is changeful and change is painful. Pain is changeful and change is painful. What is happening in this post-COVID world will be what has happened in the delivery room all the years that we've been on the planet. I have 4 children. I've been in the labor ward 4 times. And what happens there is this process of pain. But what happens ultimately is this birth. And I believe the teacher of the future needs to have mastery in the delivery of these children. And the metaphor that best speaks to that is the birthing process. So pain is changeful and change is painful.
Henry, can I just jump in there for one moment and just ask you just a couple of things there. Firstly, when we talk about chaos, which is for those of us who like mucking around in a sandpit and messiness, sounds like a lot of fun, really, to try and sort the problems out. But there'll be others out there who'll be wondering, where's the structure? Where's the orderliness? Where's the predictability that we associate with school? How do we reconcile those two things?
I would say to that person, first of all, is we had structure and COVID came and just steamrolled through town. And all of a sudden we had to change. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, sir.
We were married to patterns and all of a sudden those patterns were disrupted. I was one of those people who said I would never, ever teach an online course, ever. And I found myself teaching an online class. So whether you like it or not, this change is coming. And this chaos, I believe, is probably a new order of existence. And even those of us that struggle with playing the sandpit with the chaos have to unlearn the structure that we had. And where's the structure? There is organized chaos, Phil. It's just us learning, especially you Westerners. In Africa, we're okay with chaos. But Westerners seem to like to put things in certain orders. And we realize that that order is not always life-lasting, like Corona has taught us this time.
Leanne, I'm just going to jump to you at this point, if we can, because Henry's just raised that issue of a Western perspective on looking at all of this. So, Leanne, as a First Nations woman and as a significant community educator and entrepreneur in your own right, what does this look like from a First Nations perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And I must say, I'm really excited about Henry's comments as well. And for me, so my sort of background is from lived experience, from a First Nation perspective. So the stories, the narratives, and the analogies that get handed down. And so for me, First Nation people are so used to change, and certainly First Nation people from Australia. You know, we've lived through many catastrophes. So so we're used to pain, we're used to change, and for me, that analogy about playing in the sand pit, that's certainly part of my growing up too. That you play in the sand pit with your elders, then you might move to working with mud, but then you move to the real world, and the real world is holistic. So what is the universe telling us? And so for me, the classroom is but one little part of that. It's actually what happens outside that's where the magic happens, and where the teaching happens as well. So I'm inspired by the teachers and by the students of the future. I think it's a great place to be, where we look at things in a holistic fashion.
And I think that might be a really good. Sorry to jump in there, Phil, but I think it might be a really good now segue to bring in Nathan into the conversation.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
I'm just very conscious that we've got to keep moving with our time here. Nathan, you're sitting there listening to these wonderful individuals sharing so much around the context of the students and of course the teacher. And I love what Leanne has just shared with us there, particularly around her experience and of course First Nations experience. There was an interesting comment that we've just received in our feed from Chris regarding language and why it's so important. And the question he's just posed is a question around, can we all agree to changing the language of 21st century skills? Haven't Indigenous cultures, inventors, pioneers, and innovators, haven't they been displaying these skills for centuries? And so that's a really interesting comment. That's not for all of us necessarily to respond to, but I share Chris's perspective there. But from your perspective, Nathan, you've now been leading Paran High School for a number of years. It's this kind of new entity on our landscape. And you and your community made a conscious choice during the COVID-19 to lead through the crisis, being highly adaptive, and you curated a learning model that really focused on some of the things that we've already now discussed, things like creativity, curiosity, character, and challenge. And of course, you had wellness at the center of that particular conversation. This kind of appears to be the consistent construct that so many school communities during this time have adopted, and they have flourished in particular. So based on your kind of recent experience and from your own thinking, what do you believe is going to be the necessary skills and dispositions for the future school leader in this kind of world that will be in a constant state of uncertainty.
Yeah, thanks, Adriano, and thanks everyone. It's fascinating listening to Henry and Leanne, and there are so many through COVID time where people are vulnerable and people are worried. The imperative for schools and school leaders now and into the future to step into, across, and those gaps, to me becomes even more important. It's a part of the social contract of education. It already is, but for me, it becomes more important into the future that the future leaders understand the alignment of a school's mission or purpose with people, with the humanity, with the people around us and our community context, and then our guiding principles, because there's a practice element to that as well. But again, being clear about the contract. Yeah, Adriano.
So Nathan, I was just going to say, so thank you very much for sharing that. You have been a great champion in this space, particularly through the COVID pandemic that we've all been experiencing, around leading through this crisis. And I'm interested in you sharing perhaps with our listeners here online a little bit about what have you learned about what is really matters in leadership in terms of your own growth.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's certainly been such a deep. I keep saying to my team at school, this has been such a fascinating time. I'm so intrigued by what's happened for all of us, and certainly myself as well. So what I've learned, something I've learned really, which I hope I've always shown, but leadership is absolutely about listening, and future leadership is going to be even more about listening. I think it's always been important, but it's never been more important than at this time to listen to people, to listen to our learners. I've talked to my community about making a commitment to them, to listen to them with open hearts and open minds, because people need that assurance. So I've learned that. I've learned, again, a bit more about agility and complexity and messiness of leadership. But we've also had it confirmed, really affirmed for us, that leadership is about co-creation, and that if we really want to bring about the best possible outcomes for young people in 2020 and into the future, we've got to do it in partnership with them. And that's about the social contract of education again. And COVID has shown us that it's not a time, to do things to people, but we actually need to build a contract or a compact that is about co-creation. And we've really learned that at this time too.
I might just now come back to you, Leslie, following on from what Nathan has just said there. Leslie, you've made, I read an interview actually, that you made a quote in there that learning has no walls. And, that seems to be a bit of a consistent construct, there with what happens with the Green School. What would a concept like learning has no walls? In essence, that basically means learning is anytime, anywhere. What could that mean to a future school leader? How will they go about then, leading a community in a world that is now in a very different paradigm based on that concept that you've shared?
Well, I actually can say I'm experiencing it right now. I'm kind of I'm in awe of what I'm hearing and learning. I'm slightly nervous and uncomfortable, but only because I'm learning and only because I'm surrounded by people doing some of the most amazing things. And so I think the future of leadership in that sense is that we all work together and we talk to each other and we learn from what we have done in our different schools and what has worked, and we push ourselves out of our own comfort zones. I think the first thing that children feel is when the leaders get scared, they actually kind of close up and hide behind their expertise. And what we actually need to do is put ourselves in vulnerable situations where we're learning and pushing ourselves by learning from others. And it's not me and my ego against somebody else. And it's actually that there's a lot to learn from each other. And so I think, like we ask students to collaborate, we should more too. And I'm feeling it, and I'm learning, and I'm taking notes, and this will be one of those moments. And we need lots of those moments for school leaders as well.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to move to the point where our audience has asked us a number of questions. In fact, those questions that Phil and I have been directing to all four of you, including Leanne in this as well, has come from our audience. So we really appreciate their interest in this particular event. So Phil, you know, listening to the responses from our game changers, I'm now interested into seeing not only what this kind of means from the perspective of what they are really interested in. And I've got a question here from Kate Tamlin from the Baldwin Public School, and any of you can jump in now and answer this particular question. How do we make education more adaptable and responsive to individual students? How can we highlight their strengths and build real collaboration? Go ahead, Leslie.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I mean, how we've done it is through projects. And I don't mean specifically project-based learning as you sometimes read about it, but actually helping them decide exactly what project-based learning looks like and works for them. And we've also done it through really robust reflection processes. So that they're learning about themselves and we're learning about them as well. And so that potentially we can help them. But we really do that through letting them follow their own passions and advocating and making it safe to advocate for what they need and how they feel. So that's one way that we've done it.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that too, we're talking about much the same thing, and for our school, which is in its infant stages, but one of our drivers is going to be, like Leslie just said then, is to now allow students to follow their passions as well. And again, there'll be some kind of construct around that, but we've got to tap into the passions and strengths that young people already have. And then in the leadership space, particularly in a system as I work in and lots of us work in, then we need to be bold and courageous to say, we can attend to what we need to attend to meet our system requirements, as it were, but we're not going to shy away from allowing young people, or not just allow it, but nurturing young people to absolutely follow their passions and strengths, and then show us what they've learned by doing that. I think it's absolutely about the way of the future.
Nathan, I just wonder if we might be able to stick for a moment to that notion of the bravery and the courage that's required to step away from the normal. Henry, can you talk to us a little bit about that courage and that bravery?
So the courage, I'll steal from Leslie, the courage to be vulnerable, to walk in that space, because these students are looking for us to be human. I think Nathan might have said that. And I think our vulnerability is an invitation to the space of our humanity, and that takes courage. I myself have had experiences in my life that have shaped my life. One of the experiences that was significant was ending up in a mental hospital for a significant amount of time. And coming out of that space and then being able to share that with my students, it felt risky, but it was highly, highly liberating for my students. So the courage, I think, is inviting us to a place of veritas, of deep truth. And it's a scary place, but it's a good place.
Nathan, I wonder if we might just quickly, flip back to you around this. That notion of finding deep courage to address things that need to be addressed. When you're an everyday chalky and you've got 5 lessons on and you're doing this and this and running, how do we help encourage our classroom teachers who are so busy and got so much pressure on them? How do we help them connect with that deep courage?
Yeah, I think that comes back to that very human response. And in fact, one of my team said to me the other day that she's new to me this year and said that she feels safe to try at our school, knowing that she's not going to get in trouble if she fails or if it doesn't go so well. And that for me was just so affirming, because that shows us we're on the right track. Because what we need our teams to understand and our teachers to understand is that that's about learning too, as Leanne said, that we need them to be open to learning. And in Victoria, we're talking a lot about student agency as we are around the world, but sometimes it seems to me that we talk about that as this sort of static thing that happens, rather than actually modeling it and showing it. And if we want young people to have agency in their learning, then our teaching team and our school teams must have agency in their school as well. So we need to build that sense of agency, and in that we need to build in people trust in that being kind to themselves. And when I really say to my team all the time, A, I trust you. B, if something goes wrong, it's okay because it's about learning, but be kind to yourself as a learner. And if we don't build that sort of sense of kindness into the culture, we won't be able to build a resilient high performance culture where people are having a go at things. So for me, it comes back to that very human element. And without that, we'll miss things along the way.
I'm going to move our questioning to something perhaps a little bit more pragmatic after that response there, Nathan. And this is to Leslie. I have a question here from Alan Shaw from the Knox School here in Melbourne. He would like to know a little bit more about the implementation of the school in an environment, particularly around what do time and place structures actually look like at the Green School? I think that question is a really important one, Leslie, from the context that there are many schools right now that are growing out of this particular pandemic and starting to realise that the normal school structure timetable, as we come to know it in a very conventional sense, 6-period days and 4-period days and so on, and 2-week cycles, all timed, everything is blocked and structured, and it's this one-step process. And I believe there are many schools that are now thinking, okay, I think we have to abandon that kind of thinking. It's not going to work, particularly about what Nathan just spoke about there. So can maybe you describe what happens with the Green School in that regard?
Well, and we've gone through many iterations of this because it is still challenging just because you do have limited resources. Like you might have one music teacher and then because we would throw out timetables completely if we could. But how we've done it just in primary schools, we actually let the teachers create the timetable, and that timetable can change. It can change as a group and as a team. So they solve the problems and move pieces around, but also definitely let, if something's taking off with a student, let them run with it. So in middle and high school, but also in primary school, we've actually chunked out entire days. We do not schedule Wednesdays as a whole. Right. There'll be options, project options, service options for students to participate in because we do need to plan, but actually they will go deep into their learning for an entire day. It works up to an entire day and half a day for younger years. And then we do that as much as we can with some of the other areas of the school as well. So we are very flexible with our timetable. We still don't think we're flexible enough. But again, the other thing too, and I'm not totally sure if this is what you're getting at too, we definitely don't think of a classroom as a classroom. A classroom is a place where you put your stuff and you can feel safe and get a drink of water, but we learn everywhere, and every place and part of campus is a classroom and is a learning space. And that's really a part of everything that we do as well. So it's not necessarily like the music room has to be open for you to learn music.
Friends, I'm hearing here that we've got a whole approach which suggests that we need to be able to learn and unlearn. We've got to be solution architects. We've got to find it, and it's really interesting because no one's mentioned technology yet, which is fantastic. Because the simple response to the situation we're in right now could lead us to suggest that it's all about online versus face-to-face, which it's not. It's about rethinking what we're doing so that we are more fit for purpose. We have a question from Helen Pereira-Razo, who's the Director of Guidance at Holy Trinity School in Toronto in Canada, which I believe was 32 degrees today, and that's on the centigrade scale, so that's quite warm. Helen asks, as a school leader, what is the first myth or misconception about learning in schools that we need to dismantle in order to carve the path forward? Nathan, perhaps we might start with you, and then Leslie, and then Henry, and then Leanne. Let's take 20 seconds from each of you about the myths that need to be dismantled.
Where to start? So there's actually, I think there's quite a few, and in fact, this COVID time has probably showed us there are some illusions or some myths about school that we might have known intuitively for a long time, and it's proved to us. So, in reality, that schools maybe haven't changed a great deal in structure since the Industrial Revolution. So for me, there's one of the myths is probably seems self-evident, but that 25 kids is actually got nothing to do with learning. It's about organisation. And that's a myth that we have got to really grapple with and say that schools are very much arranged often around logistics, not around learning.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Nathan. What about you, Leslie?
I think it's that culture eats curriculum for breakfast.
Absolutely.
Concept. So it's the culture that you build around your school that is so powerful. And when they're safe and they feel good where they are, the children are going to learn in that concept. And then the one route leadership, and this is, maybe it just applies to me, but we definitely don't know everything, and we have to build teams and collaborate towards solutions and innovation.
Okay, tremendous. Leanne, from your perspective, what's the myth about schooling that needs to be dismantled?
For me, it's that schools are the knowledge holders of education. That's the myth that has to be dismantled. I think education is not just about subject driven, but it's more about the experience and the learning that comes out of that. And I'll give an example. I think that schools also have a responsibility to exercise fellowship, and so there's one to lead from the front, there's another to come to the back and actually understand what's actually happening at the back. And I use this analogy. I mean, I grew up in the bush. We drove cattle. And so my father, as a boss drover, rode at the back, he rode at the side, and he rode at the front. And we would move huge amounts of cattle stock across the nation. What I learned from that is his strategic mind. And so when I think about strategy today, I think about how he did that, all of the things that he took care of. And so I think for me, it's how do you give students an experience that actually stays with them for life? And it's actually about life experiences as well. So this ability to put yourself in a fellowship position as opposed to leading from the front, I think is fundamental, and particularly when it comes to First Nation people as well. And we talk about listening. I think there needs to be deep listening, but you need to follow in order for me to tell my story, because then you have that lens. Yeah.
So we've had question the logistics. We've had question the primacy of curriculum. We've had question anything that places experience in a peripheral way. Henry, brother, what would you say is the big myth that needs to be blown up, dismantled?
Henry, you need to take yourself off mute.
Sorry. The myth that hard work pays off. Hard work does not pay off in the face of the inequalities that we see. If hard work paid off, we would, the wealthiest people would not definitely be the wealthy people that we have on the planet. The wealthiest people will be the people that are not in the classroom. So we need to really be honest with telling our students that there's things that they arrive with at the space of learning that actually either advantage them or disadvantage them. And it's not all about hard work.
Okay, so we need to remember the social context in there. Adriano, you have a question for us.
I do. This question's probably the one area that we haven't touched upon in our conversation so far today. We've looked at this kind of future student, we've looked at the future teacher, and we've of course looked at the future school leader. But this is a question that is a pragmatic question, and it's around what is going to happen now going forward. Now, I've got a question here from Lacey, who's the director of Money School in Perth, and she's a great friend to Game Changers. I'm going to read it exactly as it is. I sense it's business as usual in the classroom, and teachers are relieved to be able to go back to their most comfortable form of teaching, which is mostly face-to-face content delivery. At my public primary school, how do we create a compelling case for the admin and the teaching staff to embrace change when they're overwhelmed, exhausted, and looking for familiar options to remove that discomfort? Because that's the great fear, isn't it, everyone? The great fear is that as we've grown out of this particular pandemic and learnt so much, we're just simply going to retreat to what has been comfortable, to what has been normal, and we're going to see no real shift for the young people in our care. I might start with you, Nathan.
Yeah, sure. It's a big question, and for us, we, as you said at the top of the show, we took a reasonably, I guess, bold decision to pivot strongly from what we were doing at school at the start of the COVID crisis to create a learning at home model that was driven by the pedagogy, not by organisation, and it's been remarkable. So I guess what I would say is that for us, we're in a process at the moment of, in fact, when I'm back to work today, to work with our leadership group and some students on what our transition model to school will be, but it will not be the same. So I've said from the outset that we have learnt so much from this time. Our families and students are telling us that learning has changed, they've learnt about themselves as learners. So we're saying when we come back to school, again, we're going to balance the stability with the opportunity. So we're going to have some familiar, some touch points for them, but we are not going to shy away from saying we've learnt a lot about learning. And when you come back, learning will be different for you. So I just think this crisis, the opportunity in this crisis, it's almost unconscionable for me to say I've learnt things about what young people have told me and then to come back to school and to return it to the way it was. So I think that's the opportunity that we need to take and do it in small bits. Like we're saying, some of what we'll be doing is stable for you, but some of what will happen has changed. And that's about looking after people as well, because we have to look after our teachers through the journey. But we have to find the opportunity.
I completely agree. I think that's exactly right. I think it's the shared belief that we know we have to change, and it wouldn't be fair to children to not do that and to not learn from this experience. The other thing too is I think it is nice to go back to, for some people to go back to what you're comfortable with, but the reality is it wasn't that easy and it was exhausting before. Exactly. So now is also an example of talking about that too. Why was it that way? And what can we do? And what is this opportunity for us as teachers as well, to change how things are done and to change that part of the model? So having that discussion would be, I think, very interesting when we all get back together.
Henry.
Our kids are going to bring back a multiplicity of pedagogies. You know, here in the United States, a lot of us have been homeschooling our kids, and there's so much variance in how kids have been taught by their parents. And I think it will demand for us to be really elastic in our approach when we do get back to the classroom, because kids are going to be looking at us kind of cross-eyed and saying, no, that doesn't work. You know, we'll lose that capacity to connect if we don't respond to the exposure that these kids have had in the last few weeks.
It's interesting you say that, Henry, because there's no doubt young people right now growing out of this pandemic have had voice and agency like no other time in schooling. It's been so pronounced and profound, and it's exactly what you talk about. Leanne, I might give you the final word on how we can ensure that we don't retreat into discomfort, into the comfort, and that we play in this restlessness of tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you very much. The one thing that I would say is that we have to co-design this new future together, and I'd be bringing young people into the yarning circle and creating a safe space where we all could have that yarn about how we lead each other out of this. And we need young people more than ever, I think, you know, as well. So that would be my view. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Phil, we might now move to the next part of our presentation, because I'm very conscious that we have only a very short period of time to go. So before
that's right, mate. 7 minutes to go.
I just want to say a huge thank you to our panelists, Henry, Leslie, Nathan, and of course, beautifully joined there and finished at the end. I love that phrase. Did you say yarn?
Yeah, yarning circle.
Yarning circle.
Together. Yeah.
Yarn together. I think that's going to be the new hashtag going forward. Anyway, thank you very much to everyone for sharing your amazing thoughts with us. I also particularly want to thank Jessime for her amazing graphic recording of today's discussion. But I'm now going to invite Phil and introduce Brad Adams, our senior partner in A School for Tomorrow, just to give our audience a very brief overview of A School Tomorrow, because I think it's a really nice segue to show what's possible.
Thanks very much, Adriano. Good evening, Brad.
Hi, Phil, Adriano, everybody. What a terrific conversation. Sorry it's going to end here in a few minutes.
The good thing is we get to do this again in just over 11 hours from now.
11 hours.
It'll be fantastic. While we've been putting together the Game Changers podcast, we've been looking at the work that Circle has been doing over the last 10 years, and we've made a decision that it's time for us to take a big step forward, and that step forward is the notion of a school for tomorrow. It's a global education network supporting students, teachers and school leaders to thrive in a new world environment. We are taking the research that we have done globally over the past decade, and Mr. Adams here has been the architect of almost all of that research. It's a really profound piece of work that enables us to establish an aim to build the character and competencies and wellness of young people in our care so that they can learn, live, lead and work with success in the new world of their tomorrow. Brad, tell us about the focus of a school for tomorrow.
Well, the focus of the work that a school for tomorrow will be doing with schools is, as you say, it's based on, I just checked the number, Phil, that we've been working with approximately 260 schools and agencies and organizations over the past 6 years around this project. So it's been a terrific investigation and understanding. What a privilege to be able to visit just literally scores and scores of schools every year and to engage Leslie's students in discussions about what education should be for them, how students view that, how students listening to the student voice globally is just not only a terrific privilege, but just an illumination of just the sheer power, the untapped power and potential of these kids in our schools. I think it's the smartest generation ever. And probably for a good thing, because they're going to have to solve a lot of the problems that are out there.
What we've done then, Brad, is we've come up with the notion of 6 graduate outcomes. Do you want to walk us through those?
Just very quickly, they do resonate with what we've heard in this discussion. But good people is really that character set of character virtues and strengths around moral, civic, and performance character. Future builders sounds the students themselves are giving us this notion of future builders, of just how they need to view their education as providing that kind of power and potential for their lives and the development of their competencies around building futures. Continuous learning and unlearning. I remember Phil and I had discussion about this some years ago, and in fact, it's picked up today on the need to give students and all of us the ability to set aside what we know and to live with that ambiguity, live with the uncertainty, relish that uncertainty and that ambiguity to create new types of learning that are going to equip them. So to view it that way is terrific. Solution architects. I mean, we've all watched the response to COVID, and what we're really seeing just globally is this extraordinary number of people trying to solve problems in these ways. And so it's been a revelation in that regard. And we think that that's really going to power us going forward. Responsible citizens makes sense. Team creators is really that whole collaboration side. We talked about that at the very beginning of the need to not incidentally skill up students, show them how to be good collaborators, but how we have to go about that work intentionally and deliberately. These are the graduate outcomes. What puts us a little bit different, I think, is that those are not just vague aspirations. They just don't live in the ethos. They need to be driven through the systems and the structures of a school. This becomes a character and competency driven program which drives all the decisions in a school. And I think that's recognizable in what we've heard today. How do we do that, Phil?
Thanks, Brad. We do that through 3 significant programs. We've got a student program called the Pathway to Excellence. We've got a teacher program called The Way. And of course, for school leaders, we've got Game Changers. We've got readings, we've got stimulus material, we've got professional learning, accredited programs. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we're going to introduce to you over the next month or so. For now, you can go to aschoolfortomorrow.com schoolfortomorrow.com and explore our content. And as I said, we'll introduce the programs to you later. We've got a fabulous team that we've putting together to enable us to do the work. In particular, you can see there on the left, the distinguished Mr. Adams, who's our senior partner who looks after research. Underneath him, Adriana De Prado, who looks after people, culture and communications. On the top right, Leanne Wilson looks after community engagement. Underneath her, Matthew Donlan is our Chief Operations Officer. In the middle, Henry Masoma, who is going to help us think about social enterprise and leadership. Underneath that, Dr. Mark Hutchinson, a professor at Alfred Crucis College, who's our professorial fellow. And then there's some bloke with a beard as well. At the end of the day, folks, individuals matter. Standards become habits, habits become culture. And who better to explain that to us than Dame Jane Goodall? Every individual matters. Every individual has a role to play. Every individual makes a difference. We began this with a sincere commitment to improve the world one student at a time and one learner at a time. This is what we do at A School for Tomorrow, and we all have a role to play.
Thank you very much, Phil. And once again, I just want to say thank you very much to our phenomenal panel of guests that we've had here today. The conversation on the live chat on YouTube has just blown up. There's a great amount of dialogue and interest in what Henry, Leslie, Nathan, and of course Leanne has had to say in sharing so much of their vision. And to those people in our audience today, I want to actually say to you, our brave and curious game changers, if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be here today. And your continued support of us and the work that we do in bringing you some remarkable educational influences ensures that Phil and I can remain energized and excited about what tomorrow can bring. And as Phil just said there, if you want to learn more around A School for Tomorrow, of course, you can see the contact details that is on your screen right now, I believe. Phil,
until next time then, friends, go well and wake up brave, courageous and unafraid for the challenge ahead, with the deep understanding that it's time to choose to allow our students to go on a journey of discovery and encounter that will give them the character, competency and wellness to be a generation of happier, healthier and more confident young people who can truly thrive in the new tomorrow of their world. Game changers, let's go.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.